when you insert a gene, you take a gene from, say, your fish and put it into a tomato, you have no idea where in the tomato genome that fish gene is going to insert itself, right? Why is this dangerous?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
There's an argument that one of the reasons genetic engineering is hazardous is because the insertion of the gene, the fish gene into a tomato, goes randomly into the genome of the tomato. And they say, or imply, that this is a hazard. What's the hazard?
The hazard could be like, well, it probably naturally wouldn't happen, and so things, I guess people would think that things could go wrong.
What happens when you insert a gene in the antibiotic resistance locus of your plasmid?
You get antibiotic resistant.
What happens when you insert a gene in that locus, Hiromi?
Oh, wouldn't it reject it? Unless
Pardon?
you put it, wouldn't it reject it unless you put it in a
Reject
plasmid?
it?
Well,
God, we got a lot of work to do in this class. What do you think, Lauren? What if you have a cloning vector and you insert a gene in the antibiotic resistant locus?
Wouldn't it just continue to produce that gene along with the other gene it
But
originally
what's
had?
going to happen to the antibiotic resistance gene?
It'll probably be disrupted a little bit.
And is it going to still work?
Probably not.
Probably.
No.
Yeah. So if you insert your foreign DNA in the antibiotic resistance locus, it's no longer going to work. Okay, so go ahead, Alan. What happens if you then...
Oh, I think we had a question.
Yeah.
Albert, did you have a question, or? No? Change your mind? Eden has a question.
Any questions in Davis?
no.
No. No.
Don't we know enough about the sequences of genes to understand, or I don't know if we have the entire genome of a tomato sequence, but I feel like wouldn't we know enough by now to know like if it would disrupt?
There's an easier way to find out.
Okay.
There's an easier way to find out. When you have an insertion, and when we do these experiments, we don't do it just once. We do it lots of times, right? We like to have at least 100 genetically engineered plants with the same fish gene in the same variety of tomato, okay? And then we look at all of them, and we say, okay, what are they doing? What happens is that you have the insertion, goes somewhere in the genome, and we can't really control that. But we can tell if the tomato dies that we've put the gene into the middle of a crucial gene, right, that keeps the plant alive. If we disrupt that gene, the plant's going to die. Well, we're not going to get any seeds, and we're not going to go to the market with that. We could also put the insertion of the fish gene into the tomato in a portion of the genome that, say, isn't expressed very well. So the fish flavor doesn't come through. So when we grow up that plant, it may be okay. It produces seeds. We grow the tomatoes. We taste them. Doesn't work. We're not going to go to the market with that. So we go across until we find the right combination where we have a good expression of the fish flavor in the tomato and don't disrupt anything else critical in the tomato. Okay?
I was reading in our textbook we had something really interesting that you
I'm
could,
glad.
yeah, that you could insert genes into chloroplasts because they had DNA. So if we do that, isn't that take away a lot of the hazards in like inserting into the actual plant chromosome?
What are the hazards with an insertion into the plant chromosome
Oh,
that are different from the chloroplast?
Yeah. I guess.
I mean, you know, chloroplast DNA also functions as well.
Okay.
Now, you know, there are situations where you might like to do that. You know, there is a containment strategy of going into the chloroplast because, you know, you won't see pollen spread. Things like that. So, I mean, there are certain circumstances where that is a useful strategy, but it's not related to hazard. Okay, okay, I think we've dealt with some of these things. The National Academies a number of years ago conducted a study on the environmental impacts of genetically engineered plants. And this is the book that came out, the report that came out from that committee, a dozen people. I had the great joy of serving on that. We looked at genetically engineered plants and tried to evaluate what would happen in different circumstances if we released these into the environment. And by applying the context of adding to the question, well, what happens ordinarily in life, either without humans at all in an environment? Do you still see disruptions to the environment, or at least changes to the environment? And of course you do. You have things like natural successions. Right? With conventional breeding, what are the different impacts of conventional breeding on natural environments? And, well, you know, we have how many millions of acres of foreign plants are growing in the U.S. every year? Right? Every acre of corn, every acre of soybeans, right, is unnatural. And it's not only that, you know, these millions of acres of plants that are unnatural, human creations, largely human creations, but we're displacing what was growing there before humans came along. So the greatest environmental impact is not due to biotechnology, it's due to agriculture itself, you know, starting 10,000 years ago. So let's put that context down and then look at, okay, what then is the impact of adding a genetically engineered crop to that background? And in that situation, we consider different scenarios, different kinds of impacts, negative effects, positive effects, whatever. And we came to the conclusion that we're probably okay at the moment. There are situations, you know, we don't want to put too many fitness-related, I mean, ecologically fitness-related genes into something like oats. You know why? You know, we eat oats. They're not a major crop. One of the worst weeds in North America is called wild oats. Different species, but they're crossable. And if you put a fitness gene into a noxious weed like wild oats, then you're going to have a lot more wild oats causing a lot more weed problems than they currently do. It'll be that much harder to control them. So there are situations that you can think of. Now, I don't know anybody who's working on genetically engineering oats to give them greater ecological fitness. Right? I think most people would have enough common sense that they wouldn't go there in the first place. But biotechnology is a tool. Genetic engineering is a tool. And you can be stupid with it. You can be irresponsible. So it is important that we consider what we're doing and the possible ramifications. But that doesn't mean that every use will have negative impacts. A later committee from the Academy on the Safety of Genetically Engineered Foods. This came out in 2004, so it's now 5 years old. The recommendations here are just as relevant today as they were then. We have no additional information that would modify any of the discussions or conclusions or recommendations in this report after 5 additional years of experience with genetically engineered foods and crops around the world. One of the things that came out of this study was, again, a contextual thing. Instead of just looking at genetic engineering, putting it into the context of what we humans are already doing, and we breeders, plant breeders in particular, are already doing in changing the genetics of our popular crops. So one of the measures that we were concerned about is the likelihood of unintended effects. Okay? If we put let's go back and use our fish gene example again. We want to add a fishy flavor to tomatoes, right? There's going to be a huge market for that. So we're going to add fishy flavor to tomatoes by introducing this gene for fish. But some people are saying, well, you might achieve that, but what else are you going to do? What are the unintended effects that are going to pop up with that genetically engineered tomato now? So we looked at unintended effects as it has occurred through different types of plant breeding. Humans have performed many different types. It's not a single technique of crossing pollen with a pistil and getting a hybrid, right? It is one technique of plant breeding. It's not a common one, or it's not the only one. These are some of the different methods of breeding, and we're trying to get conceptualization of what was the likelihood of an unintended effect. And we found out that when we placed the scale down, that there are traditional means of plant breeding that are extremely unlikely to see unintended effects. And one of these is simple selection from a homogeneous population, right? You have a bag of seed, it's clean, it's something like wheat, which is very highly homogeneous, homozygous. You can take a single seed out of that, and there'll be some little subtle difference when you grow that plant out that may have some benefit. And plant breeders have used this technique over the years to develop new cultivars. Rarely do you see that, first of all. And when you do see a difference, it's usually very subtle. So, very small kind of likelihood of an unintended effect. As we go down the scale, we come back to mutation breeding, where by its very nature, the whole point of mutation breeding is to create a lot of variation and a lot of different things going on in the genome, hopefully with some feature that you might find interesting or that the market might find interesting. And in between, we have different sorts of plant breeding technologies, somatic hybridization, somoclonal variation. None of these are considered genetically engineered, by the way. We do have those products on the market. But we also have recombinant DNA technologies in here. We also have recombinant DNA technologies up here. The point of this was to show that we really can't draw a line to divide genetic engineering on this side and everything else over here, which is what virtually everybody in the world would like us to be able to do. But the scientific community says, no, where would we draw the line? Where would we draw the line that would effectively segregate genetically engineered products from everything else? So, some of our findings. First of all, the reassurance that so far, so good. Right? There are no documented adverse health effects from eating GE foods, nor are there any adverse environmental effects from the release of genetically engineered plants to date. We hear lots of allegations. When we conducted this study, we had a public session. We went public. We told people, look, if you have any information whatsoever about the impacts of these genetically engineered foods, let us know. Show us the data. We'll take it seriously. Right? And we had lots of stuff. Lots of different groups, lots of different individuals wrote in and told us about people having allergic reactions or come down with bizarre diseases. And we checked out every single one of these, and not one of them had a foundation. Right? Not necessarily that they were all fabricated, but exaggerated to the point where they were such minor incidents or misinterpreted incidents. We don't think it was dishonesty that led people to believe these things, but rather misunderstanding of the actual incident itself. Conclusion we came to is genetic engineering as a technology is not inherently hazardous. Okay? So the mere usage of recombinant technologies does not imply a hazard. You have to look at the actual product. But most people think of process as opposed to the product. When we are harmed by something, we're harmed by the tangible thing, the noun, the objective. But many people think it's actually the process, right? The verb, the subjective. And that's a simple dichotomy. It takes people a long time to catch on to that. But that's really the distinction between the scientific community and the regulatory community, which means the public. And a lot of fear is derived from the process of genetic engineering. Right? Unnecessary. I'm going to skip through some of these, I think. Approaches to risk. We have risk assessment, which is done by scientists. We have risk management. When a particular hazard is identified, then the management of that risk is up to the regulators. So there's a scientific, but also a political aspect there. But then risk communication to the general public. Traditionally, no one was trained to do this. This is nobody's job. Right? Academic scientists and even industry scientists are very good at doing risk assessments because that's what they do. They've been trained to do that for many years. Similarly, the managers within the regulatory agencies, right? Particularly federal agencies and international agencies in other countries, very capable people. but nobody does the communication. Nobody explains to the public what the risks are and how we're dealing with the risks. So who should be responsible for risk communication? Oops, I'll go back. We ready? Non-governmental organization. Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, Sierra Club. These are all NGOs. Did you answer this? Okay. This is an open question, by the way. Nobody's got a real answer to this. So, yeah, fair enough.
So who said the scientists? Ben?
Ah,
Rose is yawning.
I feel since scientists are the ones that develop and test these products, for the most part, they'll probably be the ones most likely to be aware of the risks involved.
I agree with you that they're most likely to be aware of the risks, but are they most capable at conveying that information to an untrained public?
Some among them might be,
Some
and
of
they're
them.
more likely to be trusted and taken seriously.
That's a fair point, I think. I'd like to think that was a fair point.
Who said government? Rose, let's wake you up a little bit.
I say government because the scientists may know more about the issues, but the government is the most capable and has the most access to conveying the problems to the people. I mean, they have the most infrastructure for it. They have the capability.
Yeah. They have the mandate to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. A problem that we've encountered in recent years is that there has been charges of government interference with the government regulators in their conducting their communications.
Most
Right.
recently.
Most recently. And this is so destructive to credibility, public credibility, because we want to trust somebody who's looking out for our best interest. And if we find out that those people have been manipulated because of a political process, we lose credibility. We don't believe them anymore. And this happened in Britain, around the time of the mad cow crisis, that the government scientists were telling people, there's nothing to worry about, we've got it all under control, go ahead and eat the beef. All right? And people said, oh, okay, well, we trust you, you guys are on our side. Right? Well, that turned out to be a nightmare.
Well, even if the government isn't necessarily going to be truthful about that kind of thing, I feel like scientists, a lot of the time, like, people have their own opinions, and it's like you can find a scientist that'll say a lot of things.
Sure.
Like,
Yep.
you can find conflicting scientific
Of
facts.
course,
So.
of course. Yeah. No, you're right. I would have to agree that in order to do this, you have to have some scientific capacity, but you also have to have a communications capacity. You also have to have credibility, public credibility. So, scientists who work for a company, they may be very capable as scientists, and they may actually have the public interest at heart, but they're not going to have the credibility because people will always say, well, who signed your paycheck? It is a difficulty, right? And some people, I guess nobody here, but some people would say, well, NGOs should step in to fill that void. But other people say, well, no, because they have their own biases and political leanings as well, on both sides, right? So,
How about in Davis? What were you saying? How did you vote?
I said the industry should do it
Faria?
because they're actually bringing the product out to the people, and I understand how they can lie to people, but I'm sure they want the people to buy their products again in the future, so they would look out for the people's best interests as well, and their safety.
Faria?
I think it's a combination of scientists and the industry because they're the kind of ones who are making it, but in the industry, they have their own biases because they want to make a profit, so it's kind of like in between.
Okay. Shall we move on? Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here, I think.
That you need to talk about.
Sorry?
You need to talk about that.
One of the, this is important. This is important. And we see this so frequently, and it is so frustrating for someone trained as a scientist. And not just on scientific or health issues or environmental issues, but people get attached to a conclusion. Right? They start with what they think should be the answer, and then go seeking the evidence to support their position. And then they feel good when they collect some evidence together. And the biases inherent there are fatal. Right? So if you're a good scientist, you will recognize, first of all, that all humans have some biases, recognize that we're not entirely objective. And then you go to seek, knowing that in the back of your mind, you go to seek as much evidence as you can find, both favoring your position and not favoring your position, and evaluate it. And we find that so many people just don't do this, right? I mean, they have a conclusion in mind, and when they see counter evidence, they find a way to discredit it or discount it. And if that doesn't work, they will discredit the person presenting that evidence as being, a criminal or corrupt or being paid under the table by the other side or something. And that's, I see that far too frequently, and it's very sad. A scientist typically is his or her own greatest critic. Before you go public with something, you want to discuss your findings and conclusions and how you acquired the data with a colleague, with somebody else who's a little bit less passionate about that particular field. Because the last thing you want to do is publish a paper, particularly in a controversial area, and then have the experts come in and say, oh, you got this all wrong, and have them correct. Right? And that, it happens, as we know. Scientists rush to publish. They're so committed to their conclusions, they think it's right. They end up in print, and once it's in print, it's out there forever. I mean, you can retract a paper, but that's a verbal retraction. The journals don't go around the world and collect every single printed copy of that issue and take it back and cut out the bad paper that's been retracted. And it's got your name on it forever. So you don't really want to do that. You don't want to have that happen. So scientists are very cautious about this kind of thing. They want to be very careful before they go public with a conclusion. And public, by that I mean just publishing at all. And critical thinking skills. That's the aspect. You don't have to be a scientist. How many people in here are going to become academic scientists or industrial scientists? Anybody? Okay.
Or lawyers.
If you're not going to be a scientist, this is especially important skill to learn. You don't have to be a scientist, but everybody can be a critical thinking person, right? Which means you don't simply take things at their face value. Even if you find it appealing, that here's somebody who's saying something that I agree with. I like this. This is really good. No, you don't want to do that. You want to say, okay, what's wrong with the logic here? And apply your critical thinking skill. Public opinion drives policy. I'll wrap up here pretty quickly. More and more, we're seeing scientific issues in the public debate. Not just biotechnology and food. We have stem cells, we have nanotechnology, biofuels, that I guess you've already talked about a little bit. Evolution in schools, that's been around for a while now, but at its heart is a scientific issue. And we want people who are somewhat knowledgeable on both sides of this debate to be able to discuss the points logically, soundly, rationally, passionately, of course, but objectively as well. And if we don't, and unfortunately, we don't all too often for too many of these issues, but if we have a populace that applies critical thinking skills, they don't have to learn that much about science. Just critical thinking skills. Where are they going to get useful, solid information and use that? And skip through these. Zambia, I'll just mention this. A few years ago during the famine in Zambia, the U.S. provided food aid in the form of corn. Right? We have lots of corn. We sent it over there. And the president of Zambia, Levi Mwanawasa, had a meeting with some European activists who convinced him that GM foods were poison. And he refused to release the U.S. aid corn to people who were starving to death because it was poison. He didn't want to feed his people poison, even if they were dying anyway. He couldn't figure out that this was the same food that we all have been eating all along. If it didn't poison us, why would it poison his people? Is that critical thinking skills being applied in President Mwanawasa's mind? Oh, another one. No, it's okay. I'll continue on here. Okay, we'll get rid of her again. Oh yeah, this is the context again. You know, we have Miss Williamson who was complaining to the city because they were jackhammering up the street in front of her house, and she was pregnant, and she's very concerned that the noise of these jackhammers would somehow interfere with the hearing of her baby. And this was a major concern to her. I mean, she called the newspaper. They sent out a reporter and a photographer who fortunately caught her out of context. And did it never occur to her what smoking might do to her baby? Huh? Context. So in science, we try to find the truth, right? We have our biases, but we try to find the truth. And a scientist is much more likely than the general public to see counter evidence and say, wow, I'm going to have to change my mind. This evidence is solid. I'm going to analyze this evidence. I'm going to make sure it's solid, see where it comes from, make sure it was analyzed properly. But if it is, I'm going to change my mind. It's unnatural for humans to be able to do that. So it is a skill that you know, sometimes it's hard to acquire that. Science is value neutral, right? We don't care where the answer falls, whether it supports the Democrats or the Republicans. That's immaterial. I mean, we go home, right? We take off our scientist hat and put on our man or woman in the street hat, and then we say, oh yeah, you know, I want it to be for the other side. But while we're scientists, the scientific information itself is value neutral. It doesn't support one political view or another. What we do with that information, how we interpret it, how we promote it, then it acquires these values. But the raw scientific information, 2 + 2 = 4, right? It's an absolute. It doesn't take sides. Facts are not subject to democracy or the whim of fashion and popular opinion. This is becoming more popular now in our postmodern society, that if you truly believe something to be true, then that's the definition of truth, right? This is true. I believe it. And you're not going to shake my opinion or my belief. So therefore, it's true. Well, in science, that doesn't work, because that situation would have to allow for two people holding fundamentally incompatible beliefs. We don't see that happening in the real world. Remember when Indiana considered rounding pi to 3.0 just to make it easier for the engineers to calculate things? That's 100 years ago. It didn't get passed. It didn't, you know, but it was in the legislature. One of the members presented that just to make it easier, probably for school kids, to do their calculations. And here we come back to California and talk about Mendocino County when it banned GMOs several years ago in a public referendum, and in the process changed the definition of changed the definition of DNA to be a protein. That is actually in the law. In nowhere else in the world is DNA a protein but Mendocino County. So if you want to talk about informed debate and informed decision making, think of Mendocino County and the people there who voted to ban GMOs because it had this weird protein in it called DNA.
Besides being obviously humorous and kind of scary, does the referendum have any scientific impact? Are scientists no longer allowed to do anything with regards to DNA as a protein?
No.
Is it just
well, nobody's challenged it. Mendocino County really doesn't have any agriculture, well, legal agriculture. So there, farmers there are not denied access to GM crops because there are no GM crops appropriate for Mendocino County in the first place. So largely symbolic, and true for the other counties that also passed those bans. If somebody wanted to challenge it, they well, I mean, who can tell, right? It goes into a court, you have your arguments, and I don't think it's ever a foregone conclusion. Scientifically, I don't think there's a basis for it because, I mean, the first thing I would do if I were a defendant in this for having broken the ballot initiative, the law in Mendocino, I'd say, okay, show me where my DNA is a protein, right? Where's your evidence? But even beyond that, there are other legal arguments that probably would overrule these county initiatives. Now, it's curious that all of the, 3 or 4 counties, they're all in the north, right? So in the northern state. And similarly, several counties in the south have passed, what they call freedom to farm initiatives, which guarantee farmers the choice to grow or not grow GM crops if they come available. So, it does show that people are getting involved in the political debate, and I think that's great. I mean, that's a healthy democracy. What saddens me is the poor state of knowledge. If you're going to get into a debate, try to learn something about the subject before you do. Right? That's my position. Actually, I think that's a good place to stop anyway, because it's 5:30. So let's kill it there. Thanks very much for your attention. Thank you, Davis.
Thank you, Alan, very much. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. McEwen that you want to ask? Because I'm going to ask him a couple, as I always do, use my professorial prerogative here. Go ahead, Julia. You're always contraindicating here.
I've been working with a grad student here who's said that she's running tests that measure intelligence, and she said that she notices that each incoming class is stupider and stupider. Do you see that with the students that you teach? Regarding GMOs, before you teach them the right stuff?
I don't teach them the right stuff.
Did this person, sorry, Al.
Yeah.
Does this person say stupider and stupider? Is that a quote?
Less and less intelligent.
About a particular subject or in general?
In general.
Mm-hmm. How long has this individual been teaching? Is this a professor in UCLA?
She's running studies. She's not a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Grad student.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I'll answer that. Go ahead. I'll answer.
The short answer, no. No. I do find that people are becoming more inquisitive. They've probably heard more about it simply because it's in the newspapers more frequently. They're a bit better informed in terms of this is an issue, but as far as their background knowledge or critical thinking skills, I really haven't seen much change up or down. So no, I'm not particularly concerned about it. I am happy to see in general, not just in students, but in the general public, that people are asking questions, number one, but crucially, they're sticking around for the answers. We didn't see that so much, I didn't see that so much in the past. Right? I mean, people who had formed an opinion in this had already formed their opinion, and they asked a loaded question, right? They didn't want to find out what the truth was, and particularly people like in Mendocino County, they were insistent that this stuff, DNA was a protein, a complex protein, and it's hazardous, and they didn't want to know. They didn't want to know what I knew. They didn't want to know any information that would challenge that belief. Right? And I think nowadays people are more likely to say, well, what is the fact? Right? Is it a protein? Is it more hazardous? What do we know? What experiments have been conducted? So I think that's encouraging that we're starting to ask those questions. But even beyond biotechnology, I've always been shocked by the general public's understanding and knowledge of where their food comes from in the first place. And I know a lot of my colleagues in the academic community, particularly in genetics and plant breeding, say, we have our supermarkets are full of food, it's relatively cheap, it's good quality, we're not seeing people dropping dead in the streets because of mycotoxins in their corn. So it's not an issue, it's not top of mind, it's not a big deal. So we take it for granted. And I think it would be great if people started asking more questions about where their food comes from, instead of just assuming that GM foods are bad, or that organic foods are safer or more nutritious, things that are easily measured.
And then they could watch my television documentary by the
Absolutely.
same title.
Absolutely.
In response to that question, Julie, I think you have enough critical reasoning to answer it and say, you know, where's the data? I think that's the most important thing. And I think that one of the things that I hope you'll take away from this class, and Alan has shared with you today, is that remember the first day of class I said I really didn't care whether any of you retained any information whatsoever. All I wanted you to do was learn how to think critically. And so I think if you're confronted with something like that, I would hope that you would pounce on that individual and say, where are the critical data that supports your contention other than some anecdotal opinion?
And it's just as important if that bit of information supports your previous view, right? And we're more likely, just naturally, to challenge something that we disagree with at first. We're more likely to accept it if it agrees with us, right? And say, yeah, there's great supporting my position. It's, if you're a critical thinker, you critically analyze all of it, pro and con. And that way you're more confident with the result at the end of the day when you finish your analysis, in either case.
Rose, you have a question? Go ahead.
My question, I'm not sure if you kind of talked about this in the beginning, but I was just wondering about your work. Do you do more like lab work, or is it normally do all policy type things, that sort of thing?
My work has largely evolved into the policy, regulatory, public education. I still have a small lab, but it's not particularly active. I'm not generating transgenic plants anymore. I am helping. I spend a lot of time with other people who are developing useful products, getting through regulatory process, understanding what they need to do, dealing with the regulators and so on. I'm also spending a fair amount of time with legal aspects. You know, you talked about the forensic work earlier, and things like DNA fingerprinting. Yeah, I mean, that sounds really interesting. I might come back for that. Sneak in.
More than
welcome. So I have a program. I have a partner who's a California Court of Appeals justice. And so we go around teaching judges and lawyers about science and genetics, particularly in fingerprinting, and some of the implications of that work that people generally don't know. And one of them that I hope you touch on in your program is the ease with which somebody else can acquire your DNA and get your DNA analyzed without even your knowing about it, and it's entirely legal.
Yeah, and they just caught the Beverly Hills burglars by doing that. I think that what we're focusing on here is the idea of critical thinking and public education. And Alan spends a tremendous amount of his time trying to educate the public in a very non-biased way about a variety of issues in science. And I think that that's also the purpose of this class, as remember the first week, and that is trying to educate you on science so that if you understand the principles behind the science, then you can make informed decisions about, you know, what the critical issues really are. And so again, I have to emphasize more than not that it's important to think critically, and a lot of what you're doing on your little take-home quizzes and your take-home exam questions, which will be handed out next week, is trying to learn, and standing up and answering questions is learning how to think critically, because it is definitely a process. So before we close, I'll use a prerogative, Alan, because you've really been, I have too, but you have more than I, in debates, particularly these debates on the referendum, and who are the opponents? What are their motivations? What are their beliefs? Why are they willing to give their child genetically engineered insulin, give their grandfathers genetically engineered TPA to help their hearts, use all forms of cutting edge science, use computers, all the things that we do that are not natural, but are against this issue. And I think it's important for you to summarize some of those so that
Sure.
everyone knows what those arguments are.
Well, the presentation covers a broad range, right? There's a general feel that these things are unnatural, as we touched on, implying that everything that we're currently doing conventionally is entirely natural. That there may be some environmental impact, that we don't want to destroy the planet. You know, I mean, humans have been befouling the planet now for years, and we're just going to exacerbate it with this technology. What I find, though, when I talk to people, opponents to technology, what generally drives them, what frequently drives them, certainly not everyone, is actually a greater fear that the food supply is coming dominated by a handful of multinational companies. And I say, well, why don't you present that argument? I think that's perfectly legitimate public policy. Put it on the table and let society decide. And maybe society will decide we don't mind if, you know, if we're getting good quality food and it's cheap, if it comes from a handful of companies. Or maybe they'll decide, no, we don't like this. I mean, we're so dependent on food as humans. This should be a public product and not be dominated by companies. You know, I don't know. I won't participate in that debate other than as a simple single individual with an interest in it. But what they tell me is that, well, if we go public with that argument, we won't gain as much support. People don't want to talk about that for some reason. I think it's a fascinating area. So they find that they get more support and more donations if they scare the hell out of people. So they push the buttons. You know, I had on the slide, and I was going to go back to show it, but in Northern Africa, some of the activist groups have gone in there and said, you don't want to touch this GM maize stuff from America because it was all treated by the CIA, and it will make men sterile. And that's enough to scare people. In the Philippines, we saw a case where activist groups have gone into the Philippines and said, you don't want to grow this BT corn, even if it does give you 30% higher yield, and even without the mycotoxins, and even the higher quality grain, because you know, if you're a man and you walk through a BT cornfield, you might turn gay. I had a judge approve a divorce in the Philippines because the wife came in, and in the Philippines, divorce is very, very hard to get. You know, it's a Catholic, traditional Catholic country, and very few grounds for divorce, and that apparently is one of them. Woman came in to the court and told this lawyer, this judge rather, is a judge, that I want a divorce because my husband turned gay. And he said, how did this happen? And she said, well, he was working in the fields, and they were growing BT corn in that field, and you know, I was told that that's one of the things that can happen. He granted the divorce. He granted the divorce. So he believed it, but then he came to us to ask, how does this happen? He didn't ask, is this true? He accepted that it was true. But he said, well, what's the mechanism by which a man simply walking through a cornfield, he turns gay? I mean, at least he had enough question about the mechanism, but why he accepted it as true in the first place.
What did you tell him?
I said I wasn't aware of any data that would support that contention.
Yeah, I think that the issue is, and we'll just wrap it up quickly here, is that anti-scientific thought is ultimately anti-people and anti-humanity. And we have many, many examples of this. In Africa, not feeding starving people perfectly good food. It's happened in India. South Africa, denying the fact that AIDS is caused by a virus, denying the ability to treat their population with antiviral drugs. We have examples of this even closer to home. Number of individuals being resigning or being fired from the EPA because they refused, because they were influenced politically, because some of their scientific conclusions, particularly with respect to global warming, went counter to the political persuasions of some of the individuals in office. I mean, there's all kinds of ways in which this can have a tremendous amount of harm. And I think the most important thing is, as Alan said, is to know what the facts are ask what they are, and then to inform yourself and to exercise critical thinking, because it's scientific facts that can then judge the best public policy. Let's give Alan a big round of applause. Thank you very much.